also got Chris Pacia, Pacia, and Joe Saz. And this panel, Bitcoin as a tool to defund the state, will be moderated by Bitcoin Motorist.
Thank you very much, Lauren. So it's a pleasure to have everyone come out for this, and it's a pleasure to have amazing returning guests, Vays and Chris Pacia, and first-time attendee, Joe Saz. So really excited to have all three of you up here on the panel. We were supposed to have one other person, but they couldn't make it last minute. So what I want to start, I want to get right into it because this is a really, really interesting topic because Bitcoin was founded on the Cypherpunk ethos. So if any of you know anything about the Cypherpunks, it's I would say it's somewhat related to the libertarian and liberty movement, but there is a slight difference between a cypherpunk and a liberty advocate. And one of the reasons why I moved to New Hampshire is because I was so interested in Bitcoin, but I was also very much into liberty, and I knew that there was a lot of libertarians and people who were into Bitcoin who moved here. And the difference between, in my opinion, and you guys can chime in and give your thoughts on this, to me the main difference between the cypherpunk movement, which is how we got Bitcoin, and libertarianism and liberty advocates is that the cypherpunks aren't out there trying to argue for liberty they're not trying to culturally get liberty, and they're not trying to politically get liberty, but they're out there just trying to code. They're trying to come up with ways to make tools to bypass the state, whether it's encrypted communication or having a private encrypted money. So to me, that's the key difference between how Bitcoin is used to fight for liberty versus traditional means that we can go ahead and fight for liberty. Why don't we start with Chris? Do you have a thought on that, on the difference between the cypherpunk ethos and how it ties into liberty movements versus the traditional liberty methods?
Yeah, there's a little bit of kind of an overlap with like agorism there to some extent.
Yeah.
The idea is that you kind of want to sort of create tools and things that you can use to sort of ignore the state or sort of do an end around of it. I agree with what you said there, where it's it's pretty much what I do on a daily basis in terms of my activism sense. Other than just tweeting a lot. I don't do a whole lot of other types of political activism or anything like that. But I write code, and that's the one thing that seems like I can make a tangible effort. Right now it's small, the effort that we're making has not had a super huge impact, but it is having some sort of an impact, and it's something tangible that you can do rather than just yelling at the TV all the time or we're voting or something like this. So it's
absolutely interesting. In fact, I said that I got into Bitcoin so I can stop arguing about politics. That's one of the things that I said. Let me ask Joe. Joe, do you have anything to add to that? What is your opinion about the ethos behind how Bitcoin was founded and how it can fit into as a tool for liberty or a tool for defunding the state?
So to me, Bitcoin is clear action. I consider it a sledgehammer, whereas a voice is just a voice. Our influence through our voice is really limited, as we've known throughout our, particularly my lifetime. 2 presidential elections where the popular vote elected one president and the electoral college elected another. So Bitcoin is basically an action statement saying that we refuse to continue with this kind of behavior. If we created financial architecture where people are completely anonymous and transacting amongst one another on a decentralized network in particular, something that can't be compromised through some sort of point of failure, then the ethos of Bitcoin, in my eyes, outweighs the ethos of a voice. So to me, a voice is subpar to the actions of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I like that when you said about it being direct action. It reminds me a lot of what Chris just said about tying into agorism. I think that's a really good point. Now, Tone, I know that you first heard about Bitcoin through the actions of a cypherpunk who was Julian Assange. So why don't you talk a little bit about that, about how Julian Assange first got Bitcoin on your radar and how it could be used as a tool for fighting for liberty or for defunding the state.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The first time I heard about Bitcoin was through the WikiLeaks being defunded by Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, and they were going to start accepting Bitcoin donations. And that wasn't actually enough for me to get into Bitcoin, because that was early 2011, and I wasn't really, I was working on Wall Street, and this movement like this was just starting to get on my radar. It wasn't until 2012 when I started following the Ron Paul campaign as he was going to run for president, and unfortunately he never got to run in the primary. But that was the movement that got me really interested in these kinds of ideas and these kinds of movements. And it wasn't until 2013 when I saw the Cyprus confiscation of people's bank accounts that got me into Bitcoin. But going to the overall question about cypherpunks versus the current movement, cypherpunks are really, really important because these are the people that do. They're not the people that speak. There are very, very few cypherpunks that are going to be sitting here on stage talking about this, because every minute they spend talking is probably 10 additional minutes they have to spend arguing, and that's total minutes that they can't program and actually do stuff. So the whole concept of computer programmers, there's only two professions in the world today, and they're going to be the two most dominant professions in the world eventually. And these professions did not exist 100 years ago. One of them is the computer programmer, and the other one is actually the travel industry. So there was no such thing as travel. There was no travel industry existing before cheap commercial airline transportation. So these two professions did not exist. Any other profession in the world existed thousands of years ago. They were all there. Only the computer programmer and the travel industry, but let's focus on the computer programmer. And these are the guys that actually do it, and we don't want them, spending all their time on stage, because if they're on stage speaking about it, who's actually programming? And that's why it's so important that a lot of the stuff that they do used to be done kind of anonymously. And we wouldn't have this movement if it wasn't for them. And then it's up to the people almost like myself, that I don't have the ability to program like they do. I did study financial engineering. I programmed in the day. That's not what I'm really good at. But I trust them to program privacy for us. And then guys like us try to explain it as best we can as to why we need to use their tools.
Right, and in fact, I wholeheartedly agree with you on that point. I'd much rather have Luke Dash Jr. Coding than tweeting. I think he's awful on Twitter, but I think he's great as far as his code goes. So that's a very good point. I think it's a little bit ironic that you said one of the reasons why Bitcoin came on your radar was because you were such a follower of Ron Paul back in 2012. Was it or 2011? Because that's a very political movement. It's not really anything to do with cypherpunk, and hence so what that shows to me is that the political, which is like the Libertarian Party, and the cultural, I would say the Free State Project is more cultural, and then you have the cypherpunks, which is the more technological. I think that all three of these branches kind of all help each other. They all kind of work together to kind of move us towards liberty. So I think maybe the political might be somewhat helpful if it's getting people like you interested in Bitcoin as well. And I think it's very interesting about what you said about education, because I know you consider yourself, Tom, to be an educator. So as far as Bitcoin being a tool to defund the state, which is what I think it is, and I don't think anybody on this stage would disagree with that, do you think that our advocacy, or especially your advocacy, because you have a huge following online and you do teach classes about this stuff, so what do you think the role of education is? Do you think that we need to go out there and spread the good word about Bitcoin and become Bitcoin evangelists and argue for Bitcoin? Or do we just need to just use it, buy it, hold it, trade it, sell it? Do you think advocacy is really, really important in Bitcoin adoption? But what's your opinion on that, Tone? I'll ask you specifically on that one.
Yeah, I guess we'll go in this direction this time. I think it's both. I think if you're going to be educating about something, you should be using it in one way or another. I use Bitcoin quite a bit, and I do educate about Bitcoin as well. And I do think it's very, very important. It's challenging to educate about something that you don't actually do. Now, in my case, I also educate about trading, and I'm not doing much trading these days, but I have done trading in the past. And trading today isn't that different than trading probably 20 years ago. Some things don't change. But Bitcoin is new. And everything I do educate in the Bitcoin space, I actually do myself. And I try to educate people on the things that I do, because it is a new technology and it could be scary for people. but I think it's very important. The biggest challenge, educating isn't like, I don't think educating is the biggest challenge. It's the biggest challenge. People always tell me, what's the biggest threat to Bitcoin? And I point them to the second article I've ever written in my life in very early 2014 when I came to the space. And the title of that article was, what's the biggest threat to Bitcoin? And it wasn't the government, and it wasn't all these things. My number one threat to Bitcoin has always been misinformation. And we're getting into bigger issues on that front everywhere, not just in the crypto space, but everywhere. You would think the internet would create better and more consensus and information, but instead we get more and more propaganda. So the biggest challenge is fighting misinformation than actually educating people, and that's been a severe challenge, especially in the crypto space. One last comment on defunding the state. This is not going to be very popular in this crowd. I was never on the defund the state movement. I was more on, look, the state is going to have money. It's hard to get rid of the state. But getting them to be more responsible and getting them to be more transparent and getting them to spend the money that they get from us wisely and transparent and be accountable for it is an actual achievable goal. I don't think defunding is achievable, but I think getting more responsibility in what the state does is achievable, and Bitcoin goes a long way into that circle.
Yeah, I think that that's a good point, because I think just the existence of Bitcoin by itself might make the state behave a little bit better. But I do disagree with you, and I do think that it is eventually possible to defund the state. I just don't think it's as timeless. Do you have a specific comment on what Tone just said, Chris, regarding it's going to be impossible to fund the states? It's better to kind of move it towards having the state behave better by Bitcoin being there in existence?
Well, it certainly has proven very difficult, right? So I don't know, I hate to say it, but I don't know if it doesn't seem like it's going to be something that happens in our lifetime. We all, are libertarians because, we're in it for the long haul and we will now vote. But things like this can, one of the things that Bitcoin is doing is we have like a whole generation of kids growing up using trading money, sending money back and forth to each other electronically, using money that's not created or controlled by the government. This is something that kids in past generations didn't have. And so there's when these kids grow up and they start getting older, there's going to be this skepticism that a lot of people are going to have, and a larger and larger percentage of the population are going to have this skepticism that we need to have a monopoly we need to have something with a monopoly over the money supply. And it's things like that that slowly over time start manifesting themselves in like very real change in politics.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I do think that the younger generation, the Gen Zs, I guess, or whatever they're calling them, I think them growing up in a world where they pretty much always remember there being Bitcoin is going to be a little bit different than someone who just heard about Bitcoin for the first time when they were 53 years old or something. Now, Joe, I don't know if you have a comment about what Tone or Chris just said, but I wanted to ask you a different question. So what I wanted to ask you about is, as far as, because Tone was talking about trading, and among the Bitcoin and crypto community, sometimes trading, there's a lot of hate for traders out there. So I wanted to get your opinion. Do you think that trading is something that's fundamental to Bitcoin's adoption? Do you think that trading is really important to having Bitcoin become a global monetary system or a global standard? Or do you think it's kind of just a sideshow or a distraction at this point? What's your opinion on that, Joe?
If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to comment first on that.
Of course.
Just a quick background here. I believe we live in an age of outdated political tech. We have global instantaneous communication. The Democratic Republic, as it was invented, was to create elected representatives to speak on behalf of a massive population in inefficient communication capabilities. So as far as Bitcoin as a method to defund the state, there are multiple ways to use electronics, cypherpunk ideals, and such to do so, and I think we're living in an age where people are wising up to this fact. Why do we need hundreds of points of failure that are getting paid by corporations, etc., down that rabbit hole to uphold their bloody bank accounts more so than anything else. But that's just my quick 2 cents there. As far as trading is concerned, I think trading is kind of a weird dichotomy. With no sellers, Bitcoin would be $10 million by now. Everyone would be owning fractions and fractions and fractions of Bitcoin. At some point, people need to take money, people need to spend Bitcoin, and obviously that wouldn't have much of an impact on the market. But cashing out, buying your Lambos, buying your houses, buying your XYZ, it does come into play. So trading as a speculator, myself a day trader, I believe that there is a role. And obviously my role as a day trader, my intent is to acquire as much Bitcoin as I can, to have as much influence as I can when the time is right. So I think trading isn't necessarily an enemy of Bitcoin. I don't think it's stopping Bitcoin from going where it's going. There could be some external variables there that I could counter-argue myself with, but I do not see trading as a net negative. I see trading as just a part of the ecosystem.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, Joe. It's like a necessary evil. We don't want people to go into trading that don't know what they're doing. It is kind of like gambling. It's hard for me to make a case why gambling is good, whether at a casino or on sporting events or on boxing fights, whatever. It's very difficult for me to make a case as to why it's beneficial to society. But I can make the case that it is beneficial because that's the free market determining the free market price of an asset. So it's a necessary evil. We want it to be done by professionals, and by professionals I don't mean licensed professionals, I just mean people that know what they're doing, that have studied, that know what their risks are. So it is this necessary evil that we need to determine a free market price. And earlier on a panel prior to us, when Jay was talking about barter system and trading meat for fish, I mean it's great, but do we really want to go back to the barter system? It's one of the problems I have with the altcoin space is everyone having their own currency, everyone having their own altcoin. That's going back to barter. A piece of my company for a piece of your company. I don't think that's progress. So having this common money, having this unit of account, it's a necessary evil. I mean, sure, it'd be great not having any money in the society and trade your meat for fish. But in reality, it's more efficient to have a really good medium of exchange. But unfortunately, the current medium of exchange is completely destroyed by the state, but with devaluation and manipulation, and something like Bitcoin would hopefully in the future create a more stable this unit of account. So we will see how we get there. So it's one of these necessary evils that we just need for more efficiency.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. Now, I'm going to jump to Chris for a second here. So, Chris, do you have an opinion on speculation? What is your thoughts on speculation? Do you think that speculating on Bitcoin or altcoins or trading, do you think that that is a distraction from Bitcoin adoption, or do you think that this is kind of the market working its way out? What's your opinion on speculation, if you have one?
Well, not per se, I'm not against speculation, but I do feel like a substantial part of the narrative around Bitcoin became like a trading asset or like a speculative asset. I want to say like, I don't know if it's still the case, but I do feel like there was a time when it was like 80% of the narrative was mostly about like trading and that sort of stuff. And everyone has like, a trading YouTube channel. So.
Yeah, some people on this panel do have that. At least two.
Yeah, half the panel has that.
But yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing. But like, I don't know. I feel like that should be the majority focus for cryptocurrency in general. I think we should focus on the good that it can do and how we can make it do that.
That's a good point. You're taking it back to education there, which was the question that I asked Tone. Now, you said something which is very interesting, Chris, because you said that at one point it was all known as speculation and trading, and I think that Bitcoin, interestingly, and I don't know if you'll agree with me on Chris, has kind of gone through these different narratives as we've gone through time. You know, it was kind of something, you know, cool to do with your spare computing power to generate Bitcoins, and then it was a trading asset. Then with a platform like Silk Road, you know, it was a platform to purchase things illegally and then try to make it legitimized. And then you also are a lead backend developer for OpenBazaar. So I'd like to ask you regarding the platforms like Silk Road and OpenBazaar is not Silk Road, but you know, regarding spending in general, as in using Bitcoin to buy things versus spending on darknet markets. Do you think that that has hurt Bitcoin's adoption, or do you think that was an important part of Bitcoin's adoption curve, is to go through that phase where it was kind of used for gray markets and black markets?
Well, it was a little bit of a double-edged sword. Maybe Tom might know some of this too, but I think there was a time when people said most of the volume for Bitcoin was coming from Silk Road. Kind of when, you know, Bitcoin was being bootstrapped. I'm going to say what, 2013, 14, somewhere in that neighborhood. I mean, shortly before it was closed down, it sounded like most of the trading volume, most of the transactions that were being done seemed to be coming from Silk Road. So I think in that sense, it was probably helpful in kind of bootstrapping Bitcoin, demonstrating to people that there can be some use cases for it. And it is like the double-edged sword, because then you get a lot of bad press from it too, and you get people who want to go out and say, oh, it's only for drugs and things like that. So I don't think that that's the narrative today. I think Bitcoin, you know, kind of progressed beyond that narrative that it's only for drugs. And so I don't know. In the end, I don't think it was a net negative to use Silk Road that way.
Oh, I really want to comment on this. Starting with, I want to correct you. Did a great job moderating, by the way, but no one was purchasing anything illegally on Silk Road at any point. Your money is your property, and you can't purchase something illegally. You can purchase something that may be illegal in certain jurisdictions, but you're not actually purchasing anything illegally. And that's one of the things that's a huge misconception, and one of my biggest problems with many governments around the world, that this concept of civil asset forfeiture, where your money is the criminal, which is insane. You should be allowed to do with your money that you've earned anything you like. Now, however, the things that you are buying may be illicit in certain jurisdictions. Some parts of America, it's still illegal to smoke or buy cannabis, marijuana, but in other parts, it's fine. Many things, almost everything that's considered illicit is actually legal somewhere in the world. So it's all just a judgment call. And personally, on my personal front, and this is the truth, the Silk Road case for Bitcoin didn't actually interest me. If I was a Silk Road user, I would have been involved in Bitcoin way sooner. But Silk Road's existence did not get me into Bitcoin sooner, because there was nothing on there that I was actually interested in buying. Because you're free to do whatever you like, just not something I was doing. But at the same time, I think it was incredibly important to the Bitcoin ecosystem, positively, in the fact that it proved that Bitcoin has a use case of censorship-resistant value transfer. That's not my favorite use case for Bitcoin. My number one use case is the unconfiscatability property of Bitcoin. I'm wearing the shirt. It says unconfiscatable right on that. I happen to own unconfiscatable.com because that was the property of Bitcoin that got me into Bitcoin. I realized that Bitcoin is the first anything of value that working? Yes. I realized that Bitcoin is the first thing that humans have ever owned. And if you protect it properly, it is unconfiscatable by someone with a bigger gun. Nothing else in our life prior to Bitcoin had ever had that property. Even your gold, with the invention of metal detectors, is confiscatable. You know, you bury it in the ground, so what? They'll fly a helicopter and they'll find it. Okay? They'll just use sonar. It doesn't matter. They can find it. Bitcoin, you can store in your head. That's property number one. Property number two is this ability of Bitcoin to have censorship-resistant value transfer. No middleman, you can transfer it to anyone, and it'll get there. May not always be cheap, may not always be fast, may not always be private if you don't take proper precautions, but it will get there and no one can stop it. And that property was fully demonstrated in the Silk Road use case as its first use case to demonstrate that. Because Silk Road launched in February 2011, and WikiLeaks did not start accepting Bitcoin until June of 2011. So Silk Road came first, and that's why it's so critical. The third property of Bitcoin is, of course, the hard money aspect, that you can't devalue Bitcoin. But Silk Road was very important.
Yeah, I think we're going to get into the hard money aspect of it as well. But while we're on the topic of Silk Road, I would be remiss if I didn't say something about Lynn Albrecht, who's a friend of mine who couldn't make it to PorcFest this year. She likes to come every year. She couldn't make it this year, but she was kind enough to record a message that we played yesterday here in the Pavilion. So I'd like to say if anyone's interested in helping out Ross Albrecht and Lynn Albrecht, go to freeross.org, and there's a petition you can sign. It just takes you a couple minutes to sign a petition to try to see if we can get clemency or a pardon for Ross Albrecht. Now, to stay on the Silk Road topic for a second. Now, I'm a little bit interested in what you have to say about this, Joe, because I believe of the four of us on the stage, you had got into Bitcoin after the three of us. So you came in a little bit later than the three of us did. I believe Tone and I, we got in 2013. I'm not sure exactly when Chris got in, but I think it was possibly around that time or maybe sooner. So, and you came in a little bit late. So what's your opinion about, actually, let me ask you this. What was it that interested you about Bitcoin, and what is it that interests you now about Bitcoin? Is it the same thing? And did Silk Road, or the fact that it was used on Darknet markets, did it dissuade you at all, or was it an issue for you at all? Because you got in after that Silk Road was already over.
So my thoughts on Silk Road, being that it's well before my time, are pretty much that it was a big middle finger, and I really appreciate that. I think Ross Ulbricht was a very, very brave man for setting that up and creating an ecosystem where people can buy and sell whatever the heck they want. And that includes, cannabis or whatever, right? So I'm a big fan of having an ability to use Bitcoin to buy whatever you want privately between you and a counterparty, and all you care about is the fact that a transaction made it to an address and that you're receiving a product. That was probably the most important thing to me, and I truly believe in Silk Road, and I do believe in Ross Ulbricht. I believe that he should not be serving a double life sentence and chain. You did have a second question?
Yeah, I was first of all wondering if that was kind of dissuaded you at all, but obviously it didn't, because you were happy about that. And then what was it about Bitcoin that got you interested in Bitcoin? And I asked you this question specifically because you got in later than the three of us did. So what was it that interested you to get into Bitcoin, and what is it that you like about it now? Is it the same thing?
Yeah, so I'm a pretty angry person. I really don't like the way that things are running right now, who's running the show and so on. But after screaming from the rooftops about XYZ things that are being done illegally or immorally by the police, I pretty much got to a point where instead of screaming and yelling about this shit, I could find a solution through money.
You can say shit here.
So money is essentially your influence, and that's something that we are stripped of the second we receive a paycheck, 30% of it approximately. On top of that, we're stripped of money through various other forms of taxation, and inflation being one of those hidden taxes, right? So, being the angry man that I am and seeing all these patterns that I saw, I got into Bitcoin, and I believe that influence is going to be our most valuable asset at a point in time when we are no longer financially crippled. So it doesn't matter if you have 0.01 Bitcoin or fucking 10. It just matters that you're able to participate in an ecosystem separate from any sort of control that the government may have, and I guess that pretty much sums it up.
Yeah. So basically, the fact that we can defund the state, it seems like if you're being paid a paycheck, some of it gets taken out right away, or it gets reported to the government. Whereas if you're making a trade with Bitcoin, that's not necessarily automatically the case, although it is possible to do it that way too. Now, Chris, what do you think about, because Tone likes to use this word unconfiscatable. occasionally I'll talk to somebody I know personally, who had their Bitcoins confiscated, and they get a little bit triggered when they hear the word that Bitcoin is unconfiscatable. What's your opinion about that? Do you think that unconfiscatability is an important property that separates it, that separates Bitcoin from other assets, or do you think it's just as confiscatable as anything else? Do you have any thoughts on that, Chris?
I think it's far less confiscatable than everything else. If you have a lot of money in a lot of value in, let's say, cash or gold or something like that, and you wanted to go to another country with it, you'd have a hard time getting that across the border. But you could sneak some Bitcoin across the border pretty easily. Even if you have the key written down, you could have it in like a brain wallet or something like this, or at least encrypted, with a backup somewhere hidden. I think it's a lot easier to hide Bitcoin private keys. I wouldn't really recommend keeping the private key up here in your brain because you're probably going to forget it, or it's you're either going to forget it or you're going to make it too weak that someone else can crack it. But it's easy to write it down and hide it somewhere. That I think it's easier to hide a piece of paper with some words on it than it is tons of gold or tons of cash or something like that.
Right, I agree with pretty much everything you just said, Chris. So basically, to answer the question, it's possible, I guess, to confiscate Bitcoin, but it's a lot more difficult. So I think that is a kind of a unique and interesting property of Bitcoin that the government does have to physically come to you and make you send it to them directly. They can't just call up a bank or use a metal detector and freeze your assets in one way or another. So yeah, I do think that that's a core property. But let's go to something that Tone touched on earlier, as far as this sound money concept of it. So there's a lot of people here who believe in sound money at PorcFest. I mean, people trade silver, they trade gold. I think a couple of years ago, Chris and I were playing in a poker game, and somebody bought into the poker game using silver, which I thought was very interesting, and then somebody else bought into the game using Bitcoin. So can you, Tom, can you talk a little bit about the sound money aspect of it and what it is that we like about it, as far as people at PorcFest, about how it's scarce and what the importance of that when it comes to defunding the state?
Sure. Sound money is very important, and something I didn't realize until probably within the last 7 years. I mean, Bitcoin really helped in my understanding of sound money. And it's this whole concept of not having your money debased because somebody wants to increase the inflation and lower the debts, and they just inflate your money, or they just start printing it. So that's the importance of sound money. I don't think sound money needs to be explained to this crowd, so I'm going to take my 2 minutes or less to try to explain that the diversification of sound money doesn't actually make sense, because diversification of sound money actually devalues your money. And it took me a long time to figure out this lesson. I have a bunch of silver. I bought a lot of silver, I bought a lot of gold. But it took me a little while to understand why the hell did I buy silver? It just makes no sense. Silver is a devaluation of your gold. Gold is way more sound than silver. And while silver made a lot of sense 100 years ago as money, because gold was just, not divisible. How do you make little transactions with gold? It's too valuable. So you needed silver. The reason why silver has a better history and a longer history as being a transactional currency for humans is because it was a micropayment for gold. But in the modern age of technology, no one is going to be handing gold to other people. If the world does go back to a gold standard, I don't believe that it will, but if it does, we have the modern technology to make gold scale. So you can have digital currency backed by gold, and you can buy, a 20-cent item because your gold becomes divisible with modern technology, starting with electricity, moving on to the internet. And this is where, at this point in our technological advancement, silver is no longer necessary as money. All it does is devalue the gold. And this is also how I see the crypto space. Altcoins simply is an inflation on top of your Bitcoin. So to me, believing in altcoins is believing in devaluation and inflation of sound money. Like Bitcoin, all efforts should be made on making Bitcoin scale. And consensus will win there. So sound money is important, but thinking that your sound money is better than the guys next to you sound money is going back to the current fiat system of devaluing the money.
Right, so I think you're trying to hint at that silver is a shitcoin, which is a controversial opinion to have here at PorcFest because a lot of silver dealers. Now, I'm going to jump to Chris here for a second because do you think that what Tone was mentioning as far as this being some sort of an altcoiner's dilemma where you believe in sound money, but then you know everybody's trying to push their own altcoin. Do you think that this inflation kind of defeats the sound money argument for Bitcoin? I'm really curious to hear what you have to say because of the four of us on the stage, I think you are the most interested in altcoins. I think maybe Joe and Tone and I were mostly interested in only Bitcoin. But of the four of us here, you are actually the most interested in altcoins, and you do work on Bitcoin Cash as a developer. So I'd like to hear your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with the theory that Tone's putting forward, where it is better to have one than many. And I do think over time markets tend to consolidate around the best one, right? Over time, and it's just a question of there's a process for getting to the best one, and that process is competition, people trying out different things, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work. And I don't think that competition, especially in early stages, is inherently a bad thing. And I think it helps figure out, which one is going to ultimately be the one that everyone kind of rallies around.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. A mutual friend of Tone and mine is a guy named Ugly Old Goat. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it to PorcFest, although I did invite him. But Ugly Old Goat has said that there is going to be competition, but the competition is going to be on what the standard is. That's what Ugly Old Goat's point is, and I think you're kind of echoing that sentiment. Joe, do you have anything to add to specifically the sound money argument, or not?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Bitcoin is sound.
By the way, sorry, Joe, before you make your point, if anybody has questions for the panel, feel free to line up here. I think we'll have time to get to some audience questions, so feel free to line up here at the mic so everyone can hear you. I apologize, Joe. Go ahead.
No problem. Basically, as sound money, it creates a occupation out of bottling, as opposed to having to spend your money out of fear of it devaluing. Over the past 10 years, I think we've lost somewhere around, I want to ballpark it at 40% of our buying power. It means that saving helps, right? So scarcity creates a property of your medium of exchange that turns it from something that decreases over time to something that increases over time. So then you have an opportunity cost as to whether or not you spend your luxury money now or you wait and speculate to buy it. So that's kind of my thought on sound money. My thought on altcoins and that ecosystem is a little more aggressive. It would be one thing if companies were trying to build some sort of blockchain utilization and didn't peg Bitcoin to it to try to make money. That to me is a blatant scam, and that's why we call them shitcoins, right? They're creating their own money, and it's all garbage. Bitcoin is the one true coin that has succeeded in producing one trait that cannot be replicated, and that is decentralization. If you have a developer team, there are points of failure. If you have any points of failure, that means that you have a problem. If you have a pre-mine, you have print money, you have people that are able to sell into the market and capitalize on the amateur, understanding of the space from a ton of people that think that they are investing in Bitcoin. So I really don't like altcoins. I think that they are all scams, and I think most of them are probably blatant scams. And anything that is a blockchain tech that has a coin tied to it where they're trying to make money is pretty insidious in my eyes.
Right, and I think that's a very good point. And I know Tony wants to comment on that.
I want to comment on standards away from that. And I know I'll go brings it up a lot, and I've done it as well. standards are very important, and a lot of people misunderstand competition between standards versus competition on top of a standard. And we have so much inefficiency in standards. I can name some crazy ones. The two biggest ridiculous competitions in standards is the electric grid. Those of you that travel around the world, you know that if you get to Europe, you got to use a different plug. And if you get to Australia and New Zealand, you got to use another plug. And if you get to the UK, you got to use another plug. And I thought I had the perfect universal converter until I got to South Africa. And I learned my universal converter doesn't cover South Africa. So even universal converters don't make sense. Like, how much more efficient would our life be if every single plug into the electric grid was the same? That's one example. Like the competition there is just annoying. Another example is half the world drives on the opposite side of the road. How is that helpful to society? Look at the car manufacturers. They gotta build cars for two different steering wheel on a different side of the road. Imagine if half the states in the US were driving like in the UK or Hong Kong or the other half of the world. It's just, some things are so inefficient that they're ridiculous. I understand that we want to choose between the Apple and the Android. It's great. I wish there was a little more competition. Apple, Android, one more. But what I don't want is to have 8 different chargers to charge these phones. Like, there's no reason why my Apple, I don't like Apple, I use Android. Are there people like Apple? There's really no reason why they can't be on the same standard of sharing the same charging cord. So you have to really think about what competition is creating inefficiency versus what competition is creating efficiency and actual competition.
Right, and I think that's a very good point. I think the point that Joe was just making is that if you have a leadership team, a development team, it's actually a detriment to your coin, not a positive. And it seems like to me with Bitcoin, because Bitcoin had this sort of a unique founding compared to any other altcoin, is that there is no leader, and Bitcoin treats anybody who wants to be a leader of Bitcoin as badly as it treats its enemies. So if you want to get treated poorly in Bitcoin, you either be an enemy of Bitcoin or you try to be a leader. And both, seems like both groups get treated equally bad in Bitcoin. Now, I'd like to go to, I'm gonna jump to Chris here for a second. So Chris, if we're using Bitcoin and we're trying to go towards a free society, we're trying to go towards a way where we can be more free in our transactions and kind of cut the state out of our transactions. Let me ask you this, Chris. Do you think that the government will fight back? I mean, we already know that they have to fight back in some ways, but do you think that that they're going to suddenly try to do some crackdown, or is this just going to be a slow-moving disaster, not for us, but for the government, where kind of at some point the government just realizes, look, it's too late, we can't fight it, it's here already, there's nothing to do. So do you think, do you foresee a big crackdown coming in the future, Chris?
Well, I mean, I certainly hope it's a slow-moving disaster for the government. I think we're probably at a point where too many people own Bitcoin for them to crack down on it. Or at least to just completely do like what, well, I mean, granted they did that with gold back in the 1930s. So.
True.
But we are at a point where I think that there's enough people with enough influence that are involved in either Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, and own it and are in positions of influence or power, that I think if they tried cracking down, then I think they'd get a lot of pushback. And so I don't know if they could really do it without getting a whole lot of pushback and just like outright confiscating it. They'd have to be like really totalitarian.
Okay. And then Joe, so same question for you. What do you think that this Bitcoin future is going to look like? Do you think that as far as how we get there, not the actual future, but how we get there, do you think that there's going to be a period where the government really gets mean and realizes that it's, has to fight this and tries to, and things start to get ugly for Bitcoiners? Do you foresee something like that?
Yeah, definitely. I think Bitcoin has a dark future ahead. Bitcoiners. I think the government has a couple of options, maybe three. They have black bags and truth serum. They have the competitor, which will inevitably fail, JPM coin or some garbage like that. And their final path of least resistance would be to embrace this technology, which is going to take a lot of power away from them. So I doubt that that would be their first pick. Now the question would be, at what point are we now to be able to establish which is the most likely probable outcome? I think Bitcoin is ready for people. I don't think people are ready for Bitcoin. We had an example in France where they were revolting and they wanted to do a run on banks. Could have been as simple as everyone take your money out, just buy Bitcoin, and let's stop using anything, any financial architecture tied to the government. So Bitcoin was sitting there waiting, and it just didn't play out. So I think that it's going to be a little bit of a rough ride because we need people to understand that money is failing, not for governments. The governments are getting paid whether or not they're failing the people. So I think that's the point that we need to get to for a more likely outcome that the government would have to take the path of least resistance, being that we have to accept the fact that this is a new reality, maybe try to compete, maybe try to execute some strategies so that they can get some big bags. But ultimately, if things pan out the peaceful way, then I would look forward to a Bitcoin that is used and by the people and accepted by the government as a loss, and they can go through.
Same question, Tone. Do you think that there's going to be some more protests, and do you think people are going to start going towards Bitcoin, and do you think the government's going to crack down and make life miserable for Bitcoiners?
I can make this quick. I've always been kind of fearful that the government is going to try to crack down on Bitcoin, but Bitcoin remains pretty small and pretty powerful at the same time as it continues to grow. And because Bitcoin is growing evenly around the world, it becomes very, very difficult. And if the government right now tries to focus all of their energy and attention to stopping Bitcoin, like most of the people in America are gonna be very, very mad. Like, really? That is your problem with all the other shit that's going on in this country, and you're focusing on Bitcoin? So it's gonna go over really, really badly from that front. Not to mention that there's not that much they're gonna be able to do about it. So everything just continues to work in favor of Bitcoin. There's just nothing they can do. It's not big enough for them to try to crack down on it. It just makes no sense. And when they finally realize it, it'll be way too late. It'll be way too big, and it's just gonna hit them, and they'll realize that it's too late. So I really like the niche that Bitcoin has carved out throughout its first decade.
Right, and I think that we do have some time for some audience questions, so I'd like to hear from some people. So please speak right into the mic so everybody can hear your question.
Thanks. So would you gentlemen be willing to talk a little bit about Coinbase and what's happening there? Because it ties in very nicely to what you've been discussing just now, and alternatives for people who are perhaps just entering the space. Because Coinbase is kind of easy to do as an entry-level thing. Can you talk about alternatives? Thank you.
Yeah, maybe we want to take this.
Yeah, I'll take it real quick. So like I mentioned earlier, I think I said my second article mentioned that I ever written mentioned that talked about the Bitcoin features. The very first article I ever written talked about how not to use Coinbase, and that was back in 2014. I always saw it as just a conduit. Unfortunately, the problem with Coinbase, the biggest problem with Coinbase is the CEO. He basically hates Bitcoin. I've never met a CEO that couldn't hate the industry of his company more than Brian Armstrong. He really wishes Bitcoin didn't exist, and he runs Coinbase. And that's the problem. So instead of fighting for people's freedoms and fighting against the government, he's like, here, take the information. I'm donating it. Just take it. So it's very frustrating. I wish no one used Coinbase. You want to try to find your local community, and you don't want to buy your Bitcoin the way you buy your gold coins.
There is no perfect answer, in my opinion, but I don't. If a new person is getting into Bitcoin, I don't send them to Coinbase. I always tell them find something else. I don't want to recommend any specific companies on stage, but if you can find me afterwards, maybe I can talk about a specific company, or better yet, go to PorcFest. There's people here that have Bitcoin, and talk to people and see if you can buy that off them. That's probably the best way to go.
Well, here's the best analogy for Coinbase. Imagine Jeff Bezos hates people buying shit online. That's Brian Armstrong of Coinbase.
Anyone have anything to add on the Coinbase question, Chris or Joe?
Well, real quick, I just wanted to say, Coinbase is the knife in the back of Bitcoin, and Brian Armstrong is the one twisting the knife. Coinbase is one of the most vicious enemies to Bitcoin. Now, it is one of the most efficient on-ramps to Bitcoin, so what are some alternatives? I'm not shilling here, but most of the ways that you can get into Bitcoin are going to include some sort of AML KYC process. Obviously, we wish we could avoid that and making the Bitcoiners that we are, but to avoid fees and unreasonable premiums, I have done a lot of research and I've found that one of your best bets, if you are going to get on the grid through an AML KYC method, is going to be probably through Gemini, where you pay a 0.25% fee on spot price as opposed to a premium plus about a 5% fee or so, maybe higher. So pretty much, I think it sucks either way, but coin joining and all that stuff really comes in handy pretty quick. And unfortunately, I lost all my Bitcoin in a boating accident.
Okay, unfortunately, we are running out of time, so we have to have respect for our next speaker. But we do have time for one more question. So please.
Great. So first comment, I understand your frustration about the different competing currencies and inefficiencies and stuff like that. But while I understand your frustration, things do kind of naturally come together and standards are enforced. A good example would be like the standard for music. People from the music industry have come together organically twice now in the last 30 years to decide on a standard which benefits everyone. So I would just caution you against what sounds a little bit like technocratic authoritarianism about inefficiencies. Just gives me a little bit of pause. The main thing that's kept me away from Bitcoin, I prefer it as a medium of exchange, as a tool to defund the state, and the volatility is kind of what has scared me away from it. What are your thoughts on what can be done to kind of mitigate that?
I'll take this, Tom.
Sure. Any attempt to lower Bitcoin's volatility is basically the Federal Reserve lowering the volatility of the US dollar. The volatility of Bitcoin will lower naturally as more and more value on Bitcoin. Even today, I know, I'll be the first to admit Bitcoin isn't the best as a micropayment right now, but it's getting better. I mean, Lightning is becoming a lot better, but I bought something here for $2 in Bitcoin, and the volatility of Bitcoin is irrelevant for a $2 transaction. It doesn't matter if Bitcoin dropped 5% today. I'm buying a $2 or $5 cup of coffee. The volatility of that cup of coffee hasn't really changed. So it changed by a penny or two. It's irrelevant to the transaction. So as the value of one Bitcoin rises, higher and higher items become less and less volatile. So today, a cup of coffee doesn't have any volatility when you pay for it in Bitcoin. People just need to use, the scaling features of Bitcoin that are improving. In 10 years, the volatility of buying a car will not make a big difference, but a volatility of buying a house maybe will. Another decade goes by, volatility of buying a house, not a big deal, but the volatility of buying a company, probably still a little too high. So it's just, it'll scale over time, let the free market do its work, and I think we'll get there.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Can I ask one?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Chris has a quick question for the panel. Go ahead, Chris.
Just Joe too, but so Bitcoin's price has been, and I'm not asking this as a gotcha, I don't know what the answer is, but we're stuck around 10,000, a little under 10,000. We just went through a halving. I know a lot of people think halving price tends to go up, or at least the last couple, the price has gone up quite a bit after that. We've also seen just the Federal Reserve going berserk with money printing lately. The federal government added like $2 trillion in debt in like a month and a half or something. And the Bitcoin price, all those things seem to be very bullish for Bitcoin, and we're still kind of not able to get past 10,000. So I don't know if you have an explanation that you would think, or any kind of prediction about what you'd be looking at in terms of price.
You want to go first, Joe, real quick?
I'll take it. Pretty much we need people. We need new, fresh blood entering the space. In December 2017, Coinbase had an increase in user count from 5.5 million to 12.5 million users in December alone. necessarily the number of people, but what matters is that if we have millions and millions of people buying $10 and saying, I made $12, I'm gonna retire, guys, I'm happy, right? We're gonna need stuff like that to go down. We need fresh blood entering the space. We need people to get angry at the financial architecture that we're already dealing with, and then we need to, tell people there's an actual solution. You don't have to speak from the mountaintops anymore. Buy Bitcoin and chill.
Yeah, look, Bitcoin is still a speculative asset, so to drive Bitcoin to the next level, we are going to need an influx of new people at the moment. And that comes when, look, you're not going to convince anyone to get into Bitcoin. I mean, I'm sure all those of you that are in the audience that are Bitcoiners, you've given up on convincing your brother-in-law or your sister-in-law to get involved. I know I have. They'll eventually come to you. They just have to realize when it's needed for them. As far as the price consolidation, on the first week of January, I wrote my outlook for the crypto space. And of course, one of the 5 points had to do with price. And I said that I expect Bitcoin to spend the majority of the year between 6,000 or 7,000 and 10,000. I have a bet outstanding with a friend of mine that Bitcoin will not spend more than 90 days this year above 10,000. I'm anticipating consolidation here, but I am expecting the bull market to start from here. My other point was, the question was Bitcoin breaking out. About that, look, it'll come. I mean, people have to realize that Bitcoin is important to them. Oh, the money printing part. Look, as much as people like to, make a big deal of the government printing trillions of dollars, you're not going to have inflation. Like, that's not how it works. Look, we're all upset that the Federal Reserve is printing trillions upon trillions upon trillions, but they're going to have to print 10 times more than that to actually do anything. Because the amount of capital destruction that happened this year dwarfs the amount of money that they printed. The amount of small businesses that are never going to open, and people are just hunkering down into cash. Unless I hear the government printing $1 trillion a day, they're not going to cause any inflation. If you add up all the money that they're going to print in 2020, it will not cover the amount of money that was lost in 2020 by this government global shutdown. So I'm sorry, but they're not printing enough to cause any real damage.
There's one quick thing that I just want to ask, Stephen.
And this will be on the note that we end up.
I basically tell people that you're either going to come to Bitcoin voluntarily or kicking and screaming. So don't be one of the people that's late.
Kicking and screaming. All right.
A good place to end.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all, everybody on your panel. Vays.